10 years old and elated that today was a snow day because that means I get to stay home and bake goodies with my mom before she has to go to work for the evening. It may have been storming outside, but it certainly felt warm and safe inside. We decided to go with the tried and true favorite for the family, buttermilk biscuits. There was nothing quite like a freshly baked biscuit out of the oven with butter melting into the essence of the biscuit, topped off with the sweet taste of old-fashioned molasses. I pulled out our cookbook, a co-op bag that was full of torn pieces of paper, old cue cards, scrap paper, clippings from magazines, and cutouts from the back of boxes. You could tell which were the well-loved recipes because they always were the most tattered and the most likely to have some past cooking escapade stained on the paper. You would think through the hundreds of papers it would be impossible to find the recipe you needed, but Mom and I had every recipe memorized by what the paper looked like. As I pull out the recipe, Mom makes her standard declaration. I do need to get more organized than this bag. Someday I'll put these recipes in a nice book. Together we dug through the cupboards and fridge to find the ingredients that would make our delicious treat. One thing I love about cooking is the fact that individually, the ingredients are plain and generally not very tasty. However, together they always make something so beautiful. There is always something so poetic about the baking process. Mom let me pour the ingredients into the measuring cups and spoons. We were well on our way. Oh no, Mom, I made a mistake! I said, extremely worried that I had ruined everything. What is it, love? Mom patiently asked with a smile. I put 4 teaspoons of baking powder instead of 2. I was looking at the wrong ingredient. I groaned in exasperation. I can't believe I messed up. Mom knew that all was not lost. She simply said, we can just double the recipe. Huh? I questioned. Well, you put twice as much baking powder as we needed. So if you do that with all of your other ingredients, it'll even out. As she slowly explained, she started showing me with the other ingredients. If you put 1 teaspoon already in the mix, then you put another teaspoon to double it. How many teaspoons does that make? She asked to ensure I understood what was happening. I hesitantly answered, 2? All was going smoothly until we realized that we did not have enough buttermilk for the recipe, now that we were doubling it. Mom looked at me and said, we will have to use our ingenuity. She paused for a second. We can use the milk and vinegar to make a similar taste to buttermilk. When you are cooking, you always need to use your ingenuity. As I combined the milk and vinegar, Mom told me of my grandmother and how she needed to use her ingenuity during the war. I enjoyed listening to stories of my grandmother and what life was like in Holland. These stories connected me to her. She had passed before I was born, but I felt like I knew who she was. We stirred the mixture together until it was the right consistency. Mom sprinkled flour on the counter, stating, it's so the dough doesn't stick to the counter. She took the dough out and started rolling it out. I asked if I could take a turn. She showed me how to roll it from the middle to the outside. We were ready to start cutting the dough and placing it on the sheet. I enjoyed seeing the dough slowly disappear each time we gathered the scraps and rolled it out. Eventually, there wasn't enough to roll out and cut into a circle. Do you want me to throw out this tiny bit? I asked. She responded, oh no! You should never waste food. We can shape a small biscuit with our hands and squeeze it onto the tray. As we placed the tray in the oven and clean up, Mom told me another story about how my grandmother hated wasting food. During the war in Holland, your grandparents were on rations, which meant they were only allowed small amounts of food each week. The rations were not enough to last. Sometimes your grandmother would only have a few raisins to eat for the day. She always hated wasting food because she knew what it was like to not have food. We were finished cleaning but still had time to wait for the biscuits to cook. And I wanted to hear more about my grandparents, their life in Holland and what it was like when they moved to Canada. I was lost in the stories, and before I knew it, the biscuits were ready and had to be taken out of the oven. I let them cool a little before I dove into my tasty sweet treat. There might be one thing sweeter than a biscuit right out of the oven with butter melting into every pore and molasses to top it off. The lessons from my mother in the kitchen.